He wore number 98, number 48, and number 51 at different points in his career.
That is correct.
So although he's number 98 on the roster, he's number 1 in your heart. This is Tom Beer. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Joe.
So let's jump into it. Let's start very personal and get into your on-the-field NFL experience, playing with and playing against. Who's the best just football player you ever saw?
Probably Reggie Brown. But the best athlete football player, Reggie Brown or Benny Blades. You know, both could run, both could hit, both had great instincts, but Reggie Brown was something that I've never seen before. I've never seen a 240-pound human move like he could move and cover like he could cover and read like he could read. And I was at the game when he broke his neck and turned purple. You know, he probably would have played for as long as he wanted to, 10, 15 years easy, and been in multiple Pro Bowls. I'm jumping around a little bit, but we, in training camp in the summer, we used to have to guard running backs one-on-one, right? And you're out there in the middle of the field with 10,000 people watching you. So every time Barry would get up, you'd be like, oh my gosh, if you had to guard Barry, you were just, it was embarrassing. And Reggie would come the closest. No one could guard Barry in the open field, you know, and keep up with him. But Reggie was the closest to doing that just because he was so athletic.
So most people don't know this. The events that shortened his career, he never obviously came back from that injury.
No, one event.
And how long had he played up to that point? How many years a veteran was he?
He was probably his fourth year, maybe third or fourth year. And, you know, he'd played so much football before that. I mean, if you watch when he broke his neck, it was kind of a fluke. He kind of put his head down, and a defensive lineman came backwards into him, and he hit his head on the back of the D lineman and broke his neck.
It's a great example of how many players could have been the greatest of all time, would have been the greatest of all time in their position, at their school, whatever it may, and just had their careers dramatically, tragically cut short. Obviously, we've had multiple examples of that in the Detroit Lions.
Well, just in high school. Look at your high school. How many guys blew out a knee or, you know, got a DU or did something stupid with the law or got kicked out of class for cheating on something? You know, I mean, in college we had that. And they were great players. All those guys that I'm talking about, you know who they are. I don't want to say those names. But those guys are good friends of ours and great players that made a bad decision. And sometimes you need a little luck, too. A lot of luck.
I'm even thinking about the tragic ones, right? You got Utley.
Yeah.
Right? Who was definitely on the rise in his career. He was definitely not on the downside of his career.
The big one Spielman used to talk about all the time was Andelsek. Yeah. That's the big one. The tragedy when he got, you know, mowing his lawn in the front yard and somebody hit him with a truck. Hit him with like a truck full of pop. You know, it was like full of soda. Sitting in his, you know, mowing his grass in his front yard, and then he's dead. And he was a Pro Bowler.
Right.
And he was
key piece.
Yeah, 26 years old or 27 years old in the prime of his career, gone.
You say Reggie Brown, Barry Sanders, Benny Blades.
Benny Blades was a baller.
What
Benny Blades could play outside linebacker, inside line. He played free safety or strong safety. His ability and his instincts and his strength. He was just strong, just 230 pounds, could run. Benny could do about everything. You know, even Chris was one of my good friends when I played, and we worked out together in the mornings for 3 years at 6 a.m. every day in the off season, almost every day. And he used to talk about Benny and just how great of a player he was. You know?
Chris Spielman. So Chris Spielman, when you throw up the searches for who's the greatest linebacker of all time in Detroit Lions history, Chris Spielman pops up on lists all over the place.
Absolutely.
And Ohio State.
Absolutely. And you want to talk about someone that studied, that worked hard, that ate right, that we used to work out so hard that I'd get home at like noon and I'd pass out for a half hour. He'd go home on a 90-degree day, put on sweats, and punish himself for being in the NFL. He'd do it 3-4 times a week. He'd just go out and run like 4 miles in 90-degree heat and punish himself.
I want to crystallize that, though.
Because it was a gift that he was able to play in the NFL. He used to tell me that all the time.
He felt so much gratitude for being, or was it the opposite? Was it not gratitude? Was it, I'm undeserving of this, so I'm gonna go put myself through the gauntlet to ensure that I recognize that I'm grounded in this.
Yes. I would say it was more that I need to punish myself for being this lucky to be here. Maybe he doesn't tell many people that, but I don't think he would care if he heard it that I was telling people that. But I think that's a good thing. He never took one day for granted. And that was still the time, too, when he was losing his wife.
Oh.
So he was losing his wife. She had cancer. He's a unique individual. He very rarely wavers from his habits. Yeah. Like right now, he's working for the Lions now. I would bet my left pinky that he works out every morning at 6 a.m.
Were you going to say your left something else?
Yeah,
because we don't care.
Yeah, okay. My left pinky that he's in there every morning at 6. He's there till 11 o'clock at night, that he has a cot there, that he sleeps in a coach's office, and he probably doesn't go home. He's effed up, for lack of a better way to say it.
So he is immersed.
He's all in. He's all in.
Yeah.
He's either all in or all out. That's the way he was then, and I can't imagine he's any different.
Now you told me, because I got a chance on a very limited timetable to show up with you a little bit to those workouts when I was still at Wayne State and come down there.
Yeah.
You also played the great prank on me as we were walking out to the practice field, where I was seemingly walking out as if I was a player while I was still in college. Some little kid ran up to me, if you remember this. It's when I had the goatee and the bald head, and the little kid ran up to me and said, "Hey, will you please sign this, Mr. Spielman?" And before I could get the words out of my mouth that I'm not Chris Spielman, you put your hand on my back and said, "Come on, Chris, sign some stuff for the kids."
So of course you did. Of course you did.
I signed my own name and told the parents that I'm not Chris Spielman, but I did sign it for the kids since he.
Well, you were a couple inches shorter, but you looked the part. You were what, 5'11", 220. You were in good shape. You look like a.
We were built similarly.
You were built similarly.
Yeah. I could see the mistake,
yeah.
But during that period, I did get a chance to see Barry Sanders in the weight room, and he was not to be trifled with. Now, what was his work ethic? Did you feel like he was naturally gifted and showed up and threw ridiculous deadlifts around just because he could, or was he a serious competitor off the field too?
Did Barry lift? Yes. Did he lift like his life depended on it? No. And I like Barry. And he is a good person, and he was good to me. I sat right next to him in meeting rooms for 2 years on a little table that was about a foot apart that you put your book on, and I sat on one side and Barry sat on the other, and he'd sit there and pop his candy. He'd eat candy, a whole bag of it, and he ate it almost in every meeting. And Barry worked out, but in the off season, he wasn't like someone that was there every morning at 6 a.m, and that's when we were there, doing stupid shit like deadlifts and hang cleans and lift as much weight as possible without your eyes coming out of your head, and then go out and run for an hour, hard for an hour. And we did that every day. And we didn't start at 6:02. We started at 5:55. And if you were late, Spielman would tell you to go home.
Just you're dismissed.
Just it's okay. It's 6:01. Just go home for the day.
Yeah, I realize that you want to work out today.
Yeah, but you're not working out with me. You're not working out with me.
6:01. You're not.
6:01. You might as well go home. And I don't. I might have done it once. I might have got there at 6:01 once. And I'm like, it's the off season, But do you want to work out with Spielman? You had to be there at 6. He normally got there at 5:30. He'd have coffee, and
We also have a mutual friend who I think up until very recently was the only player to ever start all 4 years at Notre Dame, Scott Kolakowski.
Yeah. Cola was me, Colo, and Spielman.
And that was your crew.
Yeah, that was our crew. And we'd have, a straggler like Dan Owens had come to town. I think he went out of town in the offseason. He'd come to town for a couple weeks. He'd come in. Spindler came in. I think I only played 1 year with Spindler. He was a peach. He still is a peach. I see Spin around. I still would never mess with that man because he would fight you in 2 seconds for anything. Didn't matter. Don't like my hair? You want to fight?
There were a few of those guys. So talk to me about guys who are not going to be on your top 10 list. Now we're talking linebackers, right? Which you did play more than you played the running back position. You played the defensive side of the ball more.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the linebackers that are not on your top 10, but you really love to watch them play. Obviously, we know Reggie Brown, an abbreviated career. Who else?
Well, there was a time, I think it was my rookie year, that our linebackers were Pat Swilling, Pro Bowler, Chris Spielman, Pro Bowler, Mike Johnson, Pro Bowler, and on the other side was Tracy Hayworth and Tracy Scroggins that were like 6'5", 265. We had a good team.
Beasts.
We really had a good team in the mid-'90s. We really did.
So, Tom, who was the greatest defensive player you played against on the field?
He played for New Orleans. Sam
Mills.
Sam Mills. Spielman used to sit there for hours and watch Sam Mills on film because people were probably always on him about his height. He was probably 6 foot, Spiels was. If there was one drag, maybe that was it. He's only 6 foot. And Sam Mills was 5'10" and made every play.
I'm going to start out with my I'm going to give you my honorable mention first.
Okay.
Okay, so these are my non-top 10, but I gave them serious consideration. All right. So serious consideration for me was James Harrison, who I just thought annihilated people with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
He did.
If he would have had, if it was all about highlight reel, Harrison would be in the top 10.
Correct.
Right. But just assignment football, maybe not so much. Maybe he got himself out of position making big plays the way he did and the style and the way that he. I also mentioned DeMarcus Ware. I think he's a specimen.
Yeah.
And can do it all. Brian Urlacher, I think, was a dominant player who probably was the best cover middle linebacker, dropping back, that I've ever seen.
I would agree.
And Harry Carson, the New York Giants. Those guys are my not in the top 10, but boy, were their careers epic.
The tough thing about a lot of these guys, though, is a lot of them played D-end. Even like Lawrence Taylor. He was a great linebacker. There's no question he's in the top 10. But he played a lot of D-end, even, a lot of these guys you mentioned.
Do we need to have at least a debate around whether or not a linebacker can put their hand on the ground and play that edge spot, or is that really a new position that's been created over the last 20 years of edge?
I think it's a little bit of an edge hybrid position. That's a tough one because, like, for instance, I played with Antonio London, right? He was a spectacular pass rusher. Linebacker, he was good, but he got paid. He got a big contract. I can't remember what it was, a couple mil a year, and he was unstoppable as an edge rusher. But back then, we had Pat Swilling. We did, edge rushers were a little different than they are 30 years later.
Kevin Green is in that, right? I mean, they listed him as a linebacker.
He was a linebacker. He was an edge rusher, though. Yeah. I mean,
did he ever drop back? Maybe in a.
You ever see him covering anybody? No. I mean, very rarely. Not that he couldn't. But
no, maybe he'd release to try to pick off a screen pass or.
I think because the game has changed so much to a passing game over old school, buckle up and run down your throat, and there are teams that sometimes will do that. Doesn't happen very often. Just a different game. It's interesting. Then you look back at like Dick Butkus, and it was just all smash mouth. Period. They hardly threw the ball.
Yeah. You hear about Bronco Nagurski, guy who played both ways, back when that wasn't as odd. And he really is the beginning of this. So Bronco Nagurski, because he was so athletic at 216 to 220 pounds, 6'2", could run, was the fastest guy on the team. Because of his size and speed, they didn't really know what to do with him. He was such a odd hybrid beast that they called it a tackle monster. Basically, he was playing defensive tackle on whichever side of the ball they thought the team preferred to run, but they let him stand up and move around and kind of play in a bubble on that side.
Yeah.
Which, wasn't against the rules at that time, although there was all kinds of funky rules.
Yeah.
And this monster position ended up, what do you call him? Do you call him a linebacker? You call him a lineman?
Well, look at Will Anderson this year. What do you call him?
Right.
What do you call Will Anderson? I saw him line up over a center. I see him line up as a linebacker. I saw him line up. Most of the time he's edge. But I saw him line up over the center and bull rush a center back into the quarterback. He's 235 pounds.
Yeah, it's freak.
He's just freak.
Yeah.
He's just, I don't know what it is. What do you call that? That's not a linebacker.
They're going to create a football card at some point where it just says freak.
Yeah.
That's the position that this guy plays.
You just put him in and let him play. You know, he's that powerful, that strong, that elusive, that, I don't know.
Supposedly, Nagurski, at that size and speed,
Yeah.
not only at the University of Minnesota did he play both ways and was an All-American both ways, but Grantland Rice, who was the epic journalist of the time, right, one of these guys who wrote books and was heralded as the oracle of college football. Grantland Rice was famous for saying that Nagurski, if you had 11 Nagurskis, if you had 11 of them on the field, it would mop up and massacre the greatest team at every one of those positions by 50 points. And that was Grantland Rice's statement was, if you put 11 Bronco Nagurskis on the field, you could put the all-star team of all time at every position of their own position, and they would get smoked.
Maybe then. Not now.
Not now.
Not now. Not now. No.
So, okay, but this is a good debate here. The era, right? This all gets factored into the algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
I am of the opinion that you can't disparage the era of Red Grange and Bronco Nagurski, the Galloping Ghost and the Four Horsemen of Notre Dame and Glenn Davis from Army and all these. You can't disparage that era and compare them to Barry Sanders and Walter Payton and unfavorably because they didn't have the privilege of all the science, of all the training, of all the equipment, of the full-time facilitation not to mention just the pure genetic exposure that you over a long period. Hey, the gene pool gets better.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Your mom and your dad, great athletes, make a greater athlete, and that goes generation to generation to generation. So whether or not you're picking up more genetic material along the way or more condition and environmental training along the way, the whole nature versus nurture, it's all getting better.
No question.
Right?
I mean, I think my last year we actually, that I played with the Lions, maybe my last two, we had a chef that they hired, a full-time chef, and massage, like 3-4 massage girls, or men and girls that they hired full-time. Even the cold plunge. We did it back then, but we didn't know the benefits that they know now. I'm seeing all these stats on the cold plunge.
If you remember at Wayne State, I was the first one.
And you were the only one that did it. Nobody else did it.
And I did it after every game. And I still tell people to this day when they say, like you did, how did you carry the ball 38 and a half times a game?
You sat in that cold water.
I sat in that cold water after every, not just after every game,
Yeah,
after every hard practice.
Yeah. And I would have done it now. I take cold showers twice a day, freezing cold, and I'm in there for like 5 minutes. But it just makes me feel good. It makes me feel good. I get up the next morning and I don't have the aches and pains. But that's an example of stuff that we know now that we didn't know then. Another thing was creatine. Okay? Now they're saying creatine we took it in college, and it was kind of like, well, should we be taking this? I don't know. It might be illegal. And it wasn't.
Yeah.
But now they're saying it's got so many amazing things it does for your brain and your memory and all this stuff. And I'm like, creatine? That stuff that I used to throw down that I thought made me a little stronger or a little faster in college. And now kids are taking it, saying it's good for you, it's good for your brain. I guess it just takes 30 years to figure all that out.
And that's part of it. First of all, we've come a long way culturally in this country.
Oh, yeah.
Walter Payton, one of my all-time heroes, wouldn't have been allowed to play in 1930, right? I mean, there's just the civil rights era and everything that's come to fruition, right?
Sure.
And I'm not saying that in any one of those cases I want to disparage an era, right? This athlete versus that athlete, what could they do against that competition at that time? Mm-hmm. But certainly you have the great arguments of, well, if all the major league hitters of Babe Ruth's era had to bat against Satchel Paige and the guys from the Negro League, their averages wouldn't have been, and that is a righteous argument. I believe that that's true, that the pool of players was certainly not as good.
Correct.
But as we move forward today, you look at the athleticism. You look at what they're able to do at the combines and the numbers. I mean, only Bronco Nagurski at 6'2", 200, I think he was 226 when he played for the Chicago Bears. 6'2", 226. He's really the only human from that era that would even fit on a roster today.
I know a couple kids that are in some high-level hockey programs. In the nutrition, in the stuff that they're doing at 12 or 13 years old, from deadlifts to cleans to squats. I didn't touch that stuff when I was in high school. A little bit I did, and in college we lifted, but it wasn't like it is now. Now it's like a religion. Like every player on their team is in there doing deadlifts and squats and cleans and carrying weights and
plyometrics,
run, go out and run 2 miles. And I mean, sure, we did that now and again, but it's not like it is now. It's they've figured out a formula athletically, and if you've got the gifts athletically, it's going to take you to that level.
And if there's money in something, they'll figure out how to optimize those dollars.
Yes.
Every time.
Yes.
Getting into the list. Like I said, the last one that I didn't put in was Nagurski because he really didn't play the linebacker position, right? But he definitely would be there.
Yeah.
When I look at the back half of my list, I'm looking at number 10, Joe Schmidt, Detroit Lions.
Okay. I've met Joe before. Yeah.
2-time world champion.
Yep.
Before the Super Bowl era. Widely considered one of the most feared men in football in his era, and a tackling machine if you look at the numbers.
Yeah.
A freestyle here of the top 20. Jack Ham. Jack Lambert. Junior Seau. Chuck Bednarik. Urlacher. Ray Nitschke, Green Bay Packers. Terrell Suggs. Mike Singletary. Derek Thomas. Derek Brooks, Willie Lanier, Ted Hendricks, the old Raiders.
Yeah.
And then the arguably the top 3, Butkus, Ray Lewis, Lawrence Taylor. Lawrence Taylor, Ray Lewis, Dick Butkus are on a lot of the lists in the top 5. Bobby Bell makes
you could
lists.
name all 3 of the linebackers from New York, right?
Ricky
with
Jackson.
With LT.
Sam Huff.
Makes
a lot of these lists.
Who are the other linebackers with LT? You had
Carson, Harry Carson, and
Carl Banks. Yeah.
What a team. Some people will throw Kuechly in there, more recent. London Fletcher, who played the most games at the position. I mentioned James Harrison and Joey Porter. The only one still playing right now that gets on some of these is Von Miller.
Yeah, but he's a linebacker, but that's a edge. I mean, it's
Patrick Willis.
Yeah, he played well. The hard thing is how the game has changed, and a lot of how, like even in the 90s. In the 90s, we had Pat Swilling. Pat Swilling played edge that you would call a linebacker, but he wasn't a linebacker. He was an edge rusher, and he went to the Pro Bowl, and he was good.
And he might be the greatest kind of rover tweener to ever play in the college ranks. Georgia Tech, he was unstoppable.
Correct. And I'm sure that there were some times where he would get pissed off that he was unstoppable, but he wasn't pissed off all the time. He was a little older when he was at the end of his career when he played for the Lions. 95, I think. Yeah, Junior Seau was amazing. I mean, look how long he played. Jack Ham, Jack Lambert, Ray Lewis, Mike Singletary for sure has got to be in my top 10. I don't know enough about Sam Huff.
Sam Huff would have been my 9. Joe Schmidt 10, Sam Huff 9.
Okay.
Again, I'm trying to be fair to the former era, but when I look at the numbers, I can't put Nitschke above 8. Even though he won all those championships, was the captain of probably the greatest, between him and Jack Lambert, right? The Steel Curtain or the Packers
I think Junior Seau's got to be in there at like number 7 or 6. I mean, he had a great career, played a long time, won a Super Bowl. Did Urlacher ever win a Super Bowl? I don't think he did.
No, I like Junior Seau at 7.
I like Singletary's got to be in there. He's definitely in the top 6. I think. How could he not? He won a Super Bowl, was a leader of that team for 10 years.
I would go Jack Ham at 6, Singletary at 5.
Okay. I like that.
I think Lambert is a little better. I think Jack Lambert probably gets right in that same conversation. I know it's hard to have 2 Steelers that played together.
Yeah.
But they were that good.
Yeah.
And then I think it comes down to who you're partial to in the Final Four. I mean, I think the Final Four.
In my opinion, Ray Lewis was the best linebacker that I ever saw. When it came to leadership, physicality, doing what you say you're going to do, just everything about what he did makes him, I think, the most perfect linebacker that I ever saw.
From the athleticism and the pure physical dominance at the position, I think Lewis is the best I've ever seen. I have to couch that with what I've seen on film and try to compare Ray Lewis's dominance to the dominance of Dick Butkus.
Different eras. There's no. I mean, Dick Butkus was huge. He was a 6'4", 260-pound linebacker. How do I say that? Today's game, he'd be different because you have to cover. And in today's game, a 6'4", 260-pound guy is not covering a running back out of the backfield.
Right, so we have to do this era thing.
Yeah,
right?
Kind of do the era thing.
In his era, was he so dominant that you judge era to era and say, because on the rest of them, I'm with you. The rest of them are going to be, people are going to say, well, what, Lawrence Taylor, number 1. Lawrence Taylor's there in the top 3.
Sure, no question.
And as a game changer, if you sat here and said, who's the most game-changing defensive player? Lawrence Taylor.
Sure.
Completely changed the game of football at the professional level. I mean, defensively, you couldn't game plan against him.
Yeah.
Where are they going to put him, right? If you got to take 2 players to you just put yourself at a disadvantage as an offense.
Yeah.
So take Lawrence Taylor and Derek Thomas and set them aside.
Okay.
Let's say that they're definitely top 5, top 7, top 8, but they're pass rushers. And they're pass rush specialists.
Yes.
Of these guys, I think the only one that we've left out would be Chuck Bednarik, and again, I didn't see him.
Yeah, so that's the hard thing. When you start watching the stuff in the 50s and the 60s, and it's awfully white. It was all white back then. I mean, there was a few. But it's just not a representation.
That's right.
It's such a different game, and it's nothing. It's just culture.
If every great African-American athlete of that era would have got the same opportunities to play, would all of those guys been able to create the statistical relevance that they did?
100% no.
Yes, I agree.
100% no. Not that they weren't great players. It's just a different game.
It's a different game.
It's
with different opportunities.
Correct.
For all of us.
Correct.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Actually, for me, one of the best people I saw besides Ray Lewis was Luke Kuechly. When it came to instincts and matching film study with play on the field. That was something that personally I wasn't that good at. I wasn't that instinctive. Right? I just wasn't.
I wasn't either at the linebacker position.
I wish I was.
That's why I moved over to running back.
I wish I was, and it wasn't for lack of work. I just wasn't. When I look back and I watch film on myself, it's sometimes embarrassing. I'm like, well, how did I not know that was a counter,
The fast action of having to make the linebacker decision of filling right now, I was slow with that and couldn't catch up.
And I wasn't really good at it either. That's an interesting comparison, though, and I played with you, so I got to see you do that. I got to see you excel on offense, and I say, I played with a guy who was like I think he's the leading rusher in NCAA history, right? I mean, as far as carries goes. Carries. And they're like, was he good? I was like, he was great. and he played linebacker the year before. Was he a good linebacker? I said he was okay. He was okay linebacker. He was an amazing tailback. And they like, that makes no sense. You know, how could somebody go from a position you would think they'd have to be such an amazing athlete? I said, Joe was a really good athlete. He just had amazing vision in this shiftiness, this odd, weird shiftiness that was deceiving.
Yeah.
You had a deceiving shiftiness, and you were slippery. That's the best I can explain it.
My game was to convince you that I was going full speed. But I had which was never true because I didn't have full speed.
Oh my God!
But I would convince. But that was the stop and go. You know, it's kind of like a pitcher, right? A pitcher doesn't have to throw 100 miles an hour.
Yeah.
If he can throw 90 or 88 and then throw 78 and make it look exactly the same coming out of his hand.
You were more like a spitball.
Just deceiving. That's right. Yeah. So the greatest linebackers of all time. I've talked about Joe Schmidt. We talked about Ray Nitschke, Chuck Bednarik, Junior Seau, Jack Ham, Mike Singletary. We talked about Lawrence Taylor and Derek Thomas being edge rushers, but certainly right there.
Mm-hmm.
And then it came into Jack Lambert, and now we're in that final two.
For me, it's Ray Lewis. He's the best linebacker that I ever saw he wasn't even my generation. Maybe he was a little after I played. But just from leadership to practice to speeches to inspiring other players around you, that's all part of it, I think. You know, and that's the thing, too. Like Dick Butkus, did he do that? I don't know. You know, that's the thing, too. If you played back in the 50s, you probably could ride around with a fifth of vodka on top of your car and be good.
So I'm going to go with Dick Butkus.
Okay.
But I completely respect the Ray Lewis side of this argument. I'm going to go with Dick Butkus. Historically, statistically, I'm going to put him number one at a middle linebacker position. But again, I want to make the clear statement that I believe that a game wrecking ball was Lawrence Taylor. Just wreck your game plan. Offensive coordinators pulling their hair out, trying to figure out what to do with Lawrence Taylor and his off the field antics.
Yeah. Let's
would be a motion picture.
You want to talk about Ray Lewis? I mean, how many times did Lawrence Taylor get caught with cocaine and two hookers?
Yeah,
like 5,
pretty
or
much
something in Miami, and
pretty much an average Thursday night.
Yeah, in a hotel room with, 2 girls and a bunch of blow. I don't know.
Yeah, we're not trying to proselytize. This isn't.
It's just a fact. That's
it's just a fact.
It's just a fact.
And there are people who are going to. We're not weighing that into the determination of what kind of a football player they were,
sure,
what kind of effect they had on the game. But there are people who are going to take all of that into account.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So that's the top 10.
I mean, if you talk about a stand-up linebacker that was an actual little middle linebacker, I don't think you get a whole lot better than Urlacher. I mean, somebody maybe Jack Ham or maybe Lambert. Ham played, I think he played Sam, so he played outside. Lambert was a true middle linebacker. I'm talking about a middle linebacker that's 5-6 yards off the ball, calling the plays, making the calls, making the adjustments. When Lawrence Taylor was great, but he didn't do any of that. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen him stand off the ball as a linebacker. He was always on the line. It's a little different.
We talked briefly about London Fletcher. I mean, he played the most games at linebacker.
Yeah.
Had a ridiculous number of tackles.
Yeah.
Wasn't big. Came from a D3 school. Ran a 4.3 at combine, or he wouldn't have even had a sniff at the NFL.
Hold
5'10" guy.
Yeah, but dude, he was put together like a brick shit house. What do you mean? He was put together. I mean,
at least from the money standpoint, right? They're paying the edge a little bit more than they're paying the mic.
I think so. I think they got to put a priority on the edge because you got to get to the quarterback.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't get to the quarterback, it's kind of over for a defense nowadays. Before, it wasn't that big of a deal. You always want to get to the quarterback, but there's something about today's game that you've got to get him on the ground, and you got to hit him. If you don't, it's going to be a long game.
A linebacker's effect on the game. effect on the offense can be felt in a lot of different ways. Sometimes they simply game plan to run away from a great linebacker, to engineer the offense to not have to encounter and collide with a dominant linebacker. But then you've got some linebackers who are more diminutive in stature. We talked about Sam Mills. 208 games played at the linebacker position, 1,200 solo tackles, 605 assists. That puts him at 1,805. And he had over 30 sacks. And he had 19 interceptions. So you're talking about a lot of dominant football over a long career. And you cannot discount durability. The guy who shows up, starts every game, is in the lineup every weekend. He had 12 fumble recoveries in his career. I mean, the guy got a lot done on the football field. So even though London Fletcher doesn't get some of the sexy profiles on the NFL channel, and you don't see the biopic pieces of documentary footage about his career, an amazing career. You heard Tom Beer and I debate the list. We decided to revisit the statistical analysis after the episode and crunch the numbers. I gave Tom, as the ex-NFL linebacker, the privilege of anointing number one, who is the GOAT, the greatest of all time. So keep that in mind as I run through the list for you. We did have a bit of a bottleneck at number 10. We went with a three-way tie there just to satisfy all comers, because obviously to try to get it down to the 10 greatest of all time is a difficult task. The newly minted Hall of Famer from the San Francisco 49ers, Patrick Willis, is the first number 10 in the tie. The second is Brian Urlacher of the Chicago Bears, probably the greatest pass coverage linebacker of all time. And the third is the all-time games played leader and tackler in the history of the game, London Fletcher. Number 9 was Ray Nitschke, the great linebacker of the Vince Lombardi Green Bay Packers. Number 8, another tie. There we had Luke Kuechly, who we revisited from the Carolina Panthers, looking at his statistics over just 8 seasons. Absolutely fantastic. 7 Pro Bowls, Defensive Rookie of the Year, multiple-time leader in tackles in the season. He retired early, but we still believe 8 seasons is enough to get you over the hump. The second number 8 was Jack Ham of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Number 7, Junior Seau won his world championship with the New England Patriots. May he rest in peace. Number 6, Derek Brooks. Number 5, Chicago Bears captain of that 85 Super Bowl team, Mike Singletary. Number 4, the captain of the Steel Curtain, the Pittsburgh Steelers linebacker who won 4 Super Bowls, Jack Lambert. Number 3, probably the greatest defensive player of all time. Why would we slot him at number 3 then? Because was he a linebacker, or was he a defensive end, or was he a hybrid? Was he an edge? Well, I'll tell you what he was. He was a wrecking ball that just destroyed offenses, and his name is Lawrence Taylor of the New York Giants, which leaves us with the final 2. I had Dick Butkus as my number 1. Tom got the privilege of granting that number 1 slot to Ray Lewis. Dick Butkus and Ray Lewis, synonymous with the linebacker position, but Ray Lewis, Super Bowl champion from the Baltimore Ravens, gets the slot, gets the nod, the greatest linebacker of all time. While that list wraps it up for the linebackers, it doesn't wrap it up for Tom Beer and I. We're coming back for a part 2 to talk about the greatest running backs of all time. I'm passionate about that subject. Please come back again. I think you're going to be interested to find out how the debate resolves itself and who is the greatest running back in the history of the game.